Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you both for all taking time out of your day today to get this information. We always like to do these sort of free webinars with the intention of, the more we get good information out in the world, especially as people really are trying to engage employees in new and different ways. And also, right, like we're going through, there's a lot of volatility in the world right now. And so people are easily distracted. I tell people all the time, right, the goal in doing this is opposed to everybody being distracted by things that are going on. Instead, if we can bring their teams together, you can really help make your organizations thrive. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago. Most of you may know that our team is 100% remote at People Solution Center. So I have, between my part-time and my full-time folks, I have 10 people on the team, and all of them are spread across the country. I have a few folks that live in St. Louis, but even our local people don't have the opportunity don't see each other very often. And so we've had to really build a team environment that has a very deep culture that gets people engaged without the benefit of seeing each other when we're pouring our cup of coffee during the day. A couple of weeks ago, I was very fortunate. Once a year, we bring in the entire team in person and spend a couple of days together. And you never know how that the full days together with your team would go in the first place. But imagine doing that when some of them have only met each other in person twice, maybe 3 times. And yet we walked away from those 3 days with an amazing sense of just how strong our culture is and how well the team is working day to day without me as the owner having to be in the middle of it. And the really cool part, even as I was putting final touches on this presentation, the part that sort of warmed my heart was there are at least 3 big ideas that came out of that meeting, not from me, but from the team members, that not only are great ideas, but the team walked away and they have started to implement them without me needing to be a part of them at all. And all of them are set to help us propel us forward, hit results we've not hit before, and also shore us up. So with volatility going on, right? Like, how do we make sure that no matter what changes, we are ready to pivot? And so it was really exciting to take that and step back and think about, so what is it that we've done in these years that I've built the organization and built a team? What have we done that's really worked well, and what allows us to get there? And so that's really at the core of what I want to share with you today, are those strategies that help the team align, that get people engaged in a really different way, not just engaged and having fun every day, but engaged to the level that they want to be part of the solutions and they really want to think outside of the box. So for those of you that I have not met in person anywhere along the way, just to give you a little bit of background, I came out of corporate HR. I spent most of my career in corporate human resources, including working for 15 years for Progressive Insurance on their HR side, and then also as their director of recruiting for all of their claims and contact centers across the country. 9.5 years ago, we are this close to being able to say 10 years ago, but 9.5 years ago, I had the really unique opportunity to follow a dream that I had been talking about and telling my dad about since the day I graduated college, to say, I want to start my own HR consulting firm. And so did that in February of 2016, and have been able to build a team around me that delivers amazing results every day. And our vision, as we have continued to build, when it went beyond just me and seeing what kind of strategic impact we could make, our really vision that drives us forward as an organization is this idea that over half of the US population works for a small business of some sort. And our job as the HR consulting firm to small to mid-sized companies, our role is really to make the world a better place by impacting each of those businesses, because we all touch them in one way, shape, or form. And so all of these ideas are about, right, how do you create an environment where, yes, people have fun, but that engagement is more about whether or not we had parties and picnics. And it's really about, are your employees engaged in solving bigger problems? Is there clarity on people's roles? Do people feel empowered to make a difference? One of the big ideas that came out of this meeting that we just had, one of my team members in an exercise that I'll share with you during today, came up with this idea that's kind of been percolating in her head she's been with me for 4 years now, and it's always been percolating there. And she's mentioned it here or there, but all of a sudden, like, it blossomed, and she's like, I know we're at least 2 years away, Katie, from being able to do this, but I really, really, really am excited about it, and I can't wait till we get there. And I looked at her and I said, we're not 2 years away. I'm like, we're more like 2 weeks. So put more detail behind it. And by the time last week came about, she had written herself a new job description. She'd built out a communication and a transition plan. She had met with her peers to talk about what might work and might not work. And she'd gotten everybody on board. That's just a level of engagement you don't get by simply buying people pizza, right? Like, it takes something very much bigger than that. And so the ideas and suggestions that I'm going to share with you today are really about how do you build a team that is rowing together all at the same time. And if any of you have ever been on a row crew, right? The idea here is when you do this all in perfect synchronicity, everybody actually has a slightly different role based on where you're at in the boat. But when we all do it well, it makes it easier for the entire team to move forward, and it looks somewhat effortless. One of the paths that I run around in St. Louis has places there. They launch the row crews, and you get to watch them, and they barely look like they're barely lifting the oars, right? They're not working that hard. Well, I've kayaked on that same lake, and it's a lot of work. So it's the concept that when we do it together, we can make life a lot easier. And so, but it takes effort and it takes intentionality. So the 4 key pillars that we're going to talk about today in terms of how do you create this level of engagement and alignment are all about developing trust. And what does that actually mean in the work environment? This isn't like hold hands and sing kumbaya kind of trust. Understanding communication styles and stress behaviors, which is a really important part, especially, right? Like, well, when things are volatile, kind of like in COVID, right? When things were getting crazy, we saw a lot of each other's stress behaviors. How do you work to establish expectations and also group norms so that as the leader, you don't have to spend your time managing people because the team is managing itself, and the team really understands what's expected, and they're willing to respectfully hold each other accountable. And then the last one, how do you empower and engage to get people to participate? So encouraging participation. We hear clients all the time say, like, well, Katie, I try to have engagement in my meetings, but I get crickets. We're actually going to show you some good tips to keep that moving forward. But let's start with this concept of developing trust and understanding what exactly that means. There is an author out there that is probably one of my favorite authors from a leadership development perspective and a team development work, and his name is Patrick Lencioni. If you've not picked up his work, it should be in your must-read leadership type of books. And he wrote this book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He rewrote the book called in the verbiage of The Advantage, because not every style likes the way he wrote 5 Dysfunctions. So he took the exact same content and rewrote it a different way and got 2 bestsellers. So smart move on his part. But one of his key themes is around the fact that we think about great teams that we've been on, and we think they just sort of happen magically, right? And the reality of it, teamwork isn't just a virtue, something that magically happens. It's really very much a choice. And as a leader, we have to make the strategic choice to invest time in building that teamwork. I'll use my team meeting as an example, right? We get together once a year. It would be really easy to spend that once a year going, we've got to pound out as much work product as we possibly can in 3 days, and all we're going to do is get work done. I will tell you, we do about that much work stuff. We do all of that outside of the meeting, and instead we spend those 3 days doing all sorts of team development work. The fun committee created human bingo. We had these really cool exercises, all of which ultimately got me to way better work product than I could ever have if I had said, now for 2 hours, I want you to solve this one problem and be really serious about it. but it was through the engagement and the time that we invest building the team that it really makes a difference. But it can't just be once a year. I just save the really cool stuff for, like, this will be more fun in person for that event. But throughout the year, we spend time doing what Lencioni refers to as building trust. This model comes out of Lencioni's work in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team book. And the key concept here is there are 5 behaviors that when teams do this well, you really maximize engagement and empowerment and you get better results. But at the base of this model is this concept of trust. And Lencioni says it's not just that I trust when I do A, Nicole will do B, but instead it's the level of trust that says, you know what? I trust Nicole enough that I am willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to say, you know what, I made a mistake, or I don't know that answer. Whether I'm the owner or I'm the new hire that's 2 days in, it's that willingness to, like, put yourself out there, knowing that people are going to hold you safe and it's going to be okay. It's having trust at a level that a team member is willing to say, I just wrote a new job description for myself and I want to do it, and shout it out in front of her entire team and know that they're not going to look at her and be like, well, who are you to do that? Right. And not one person, like, they were like, well, tell us what it was, right? Nobody was offended. Nobody felt left out because the level of trust on the team is at such a high level. Then comes this other piece, which Lencioni refers to as conflict. And I will tell you, there's a whole group of people that every time I say that word are like, oh, it makes me sick. One of my team members is that way. She hates the word conflict. But Lencioni talks about it in terms of healthy conflict, right? That respectful engagement where we just share ideas and we disagree respectfully, but we do it knowing we're all rowing in the same direction and going for the greater good. And so when teams have strong trust, conflict doesn't feel like conflict. Conflict feels like problem solving. We finished the 3 days and I said, again, several of the activities I'll share were big conflict conversations. And my team was like, that was great. And I said, that was conflict. And Sarah, my team who hates conflict, goes, no, that was not conflict. And I'm like, yes, it was. It was just the kind you actually want to willingly engage in. And as you keep going up Lencioni's pyramid, right, things on the team continue to just be working better and better. But you're willing, this accountability piece is probably the hardest one for teams to get, because when we trust each other, it's often because we like one another. When we like one another, then we worry that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, so we don't want to hold them accountable. But great teams actually thrive by holding one another accountable. And it doesn't mean we say, well, Nicole, why didn't you do that? But instead, we reach out and we say, you know what, Nicole, I noticed that project is running a little bit behind the schedule we had planned. What help do you need? What resources or obstacles do you need addressed, right? How can we support you? Not, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to? But it takes a level of trust that everybody knows that you're only holding me accountable because you care about the greater good. And actually, you're willing to make an investment in giving me feedback, which is scary for some people. All of this is to say you have to spend time developing this really big foundation of trust, because as you go up the pyramid, if that foundation of trust isn't solid enough, it starts to crack and things start to fall apart. One of the exercises that I love to do, and we actually do it anytime somebody joins the team, is we actually go around the group and we have this conversation. And I ask the current team, right? Like, where are you today on trust? So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being there's a severe lack of trust, 10 being trust is super high and people are really willing to be vulnerable with one another. And I would say 5 somewhere in the middle, right? People trust each other enough to get the work done, but not necessarily enough to be vulnerable. I'd love for folks, take a minute, drop in the chat. Like, as you think about your teams, where do you feel like your team is today on that scale of 1 to 10? And while folks are putting that into the chat, you can just put in a number. You know, getting background is also helpful, but putting in a number. But sometimes it's taking the step back and getting the team to think about this that is super helpful to you to really to recognize not just where are they with you as a leader, but where are they with one another. And I can tell you that the exercises I'm going to talk through today, that many of you are sort of that 5 to 6 range, which is pretty common, right? If you're at the 1, the world has like it's shattering every day and there's a lot of drama and things are in a bad place. A 5 to 6, it's one of those, like, it feels okay. People aren't coming in like ready to like strangle one another, but it could be easier, right? Once you get to the 7 and 8, it's one of those that, like, I'm not sure we ever all get to a 10 ever, because the minute a team member joins or a team member leaves, all of that impacts your level of trust. And so doing this regular kind of check-in on where do people see themselves can be a really helpful tool for you as you think about engagement. Because if you're not in that 7 or 8 range, you're definitely not getting that level of engagement that you're looking for, because people are holding something back and it's difficult for them to completely let go. The reality is, when people think about trust, right, they tend to think about activities where, you fall backwards off of a desk, or you have to like hug it out. And I am not a huggy person, so we don't do things like hug it out or sing Kumbaya. But the reality is, building trust really comes from your team's ability to self-reflect. And then most importantly, it comes from the ability and willingness to share vulnerabilities with one another. This doesn't mean we have to know our deepest, darkest trauma from our childhoods, but it does mean we need to be willing to say, you know what, here's the thing I'm great at, and here's something I could use some help with. Or here's something about my communication style that's important for you to know. So willingness to just talk like normal human beings and see each other beyond just the coworker, right? And actually get to know why people do the things that they do and how they prefer to interact. So some of the examples of ways that we can do this. This one comes right out of Lencioni's work. He calls this the 3 questions exercise. I will tell you, this is probably one of my all-time favorites, and yet it's super simple, but it works in a group of people who have never met one another, and it works really well in a group of people that like have worked together for years. This one for sure, every single time a team member joins our team, we go back and redo this exercise. My only caveat to it is you have to change your story for number 3 so that we all continue to get to know one another. But the 3 questions are really easy, but they're intentionally built that they require you to share a little bit of yourself, but it's not your deepest, darkest secrets. And you can meet people where they're at. If you have a team of people that don't know each other well, they're probably gonna tell a story in number 3, but maybe not like this big, powerful story. The more people know each other, the more they share. But the 3 questions: where were you born and what do you consider to be your hometown? How many siblings do you have and where do you fall in the order? And then share a story from your childhood that shapes who you are today. And that, a lot of times, that third one, people think that has to be a traumatic story. Actually, most of my stories are really fun stories from a childhood that I really like. But it's interesting, even the siblings, right? Nobody just says, I have 2 siblings. Like, everybody tells you the story about, do you get along? Do you not get along? How far apart are you? How did that like form you? You end up learning a lot about people. And they're topics that people feel comfortable with, but we also find there's a lot of connections with them. So the idea in building trust, again, is reflect and then share out. And when we do this, people start to build relationships and common bonds that carry you to the next step. The second exercise that we use in developing trust is along the lines of gauging where the team falls in terms of where trust levels are, is this idea of helping people talk about and think about, how do I approach trust? We tend to think that everybody views trust the same way that we do, and that we all have the same sort of speed of trust. And the reality is, there are very, very wide gaps on this one. There's a whole group of people that lead with trust, and you have to do like, I fall into this category. My husband calls me most likely to be stolen, and he's not wrong. And I would likely make friends with the people who steal me. Like, you have to do a lot to break my trust. And I am very sure if you tried, I would be like, I must have done something wrong. I must have misunderstood. And that's the problem, because I am there almost instantaneously. On the other side of the continuum, we have people on my team who are like, some of them are self-professed 12s, right? They are slow to trust. You have to really earn it, and it takes a whole lot of deposits in the piggy bank. The other thing with the folks that are on the 10 end of this scale, it can break instantaneously. And we tend to think of this as good or bad, and neither one is, right? There are challenges with the fact that I am likely to get stolen. I fall for stuff in people all the time that I shouldn't. And on the flip side, right, if you're so slow to trust that nobody can ever earn your trust, then how do you ever build those bonds as a team? So we have to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. And then the 5 to 6, 7, 8 range, right? Those all look a little bit different. Sometimes a 5 is somebody who leads with trust, but it breaks really easily and you can't get it back. Sometimes if somebody will say, I'm a 5, but they're like, I'm like, it takes me a minute, but once you've got it, like you've got it forever and you could never break it. But by when I do this exercise for teams, we actually have them kind of line up and pick, like stand in a line on a scale of 1 to 10, pick their number, and then visually you can see where does the entire team fall. And then we go down the line and have people share what number they picked and a little bit about why. And you can be amazed. I've seen teams that have worked together for a really long time and they're like, how is that person down there? Like, right. And oftentimes your ones have no idea that there are 10s and like they don't know that there are people who are walking around who just take a lot of deposits in a piggy bank to trust. But once they learn that, they're like, oh, so it's not just me, right? And so all of a sudden it changes their perspective. And so this is a great team exercise. It doesn't take a ton to facilitate, but getting people to think about this, because most of us have never had to articulate this. Also, this works really well one-on-one. If you have a new hire, like I sit and talk about this because people need to know that because I'm a 1 on trust, I assume we're at trust by like noon on day 1, which means I'm also expecting you to engage in healthy conflict. So I assume if you're having a problem, you're going to tell me right away. Well, my new hire probably doesn't feel that way by noon on day 1. And so I have to like give them time and space to make that happen. But what's really interesting is when you find people on both sides of the continuum trying to work together, if they don't understand this concept that there are differences, you will find them not engaging in conflict in healthy ways and things start going awry. The next exercise that I love to do, and this also kind of falls under aligning on group norms, but we also assume that the things that build trust for me build trust for everyone else. And in reality, could not be farther from the truth. Based on my communication style, right? The more somebody shares with me, the more I trust them. There are a lot of people in this world that every time I tell one more story that is about my life, they're like, why is she so willing to tell me everything? She must be making it up, right? So what builds trust for one person may be different than another. And so even just having the team to each individual go through and talk about what builds trust, what are the behaviors for them that build trust, and what behaviors derail them, and then share them as a group. It helps start to develop group norms and help you understand how do you need the team to operate. And when one of the derailing behaviors happen, we know we need to have the conversation and not just sweep it under the rug. The last trust exercise that I find particularly helpful, I use this in coaching conversations. I actually have a document. If anybody wants it afterwards, if you type your information in the chat, Nicole will make sure it goes out. I use this as a document. It's called How I Want to Be Coached, but it also can work well as a team exercise. And the idea here is, right, like each person goes through, give it to people in advance so that it's not a scary situation. But we ask in one word, the one thing I need most from others. I'm motivated by many things, but these three things are most important to me. The top 3 things that frustrate me are, and if those things happen, here's what you are likely to see. And then the last thing I love is the one thing I really want others to know about me is. And so if you go through and you have people share, the more opportunities on a regular basis, these don't have to be 3-hour-long conversations. They can be quick 10 to 15-minute discussions, but have everyone participate. We get used to sharing and understanding what that looks like. And then we get really good at, really making sure that we're constantly depositing money in those piggy banks of trust. And that's really probably the most important part about trust is you've got to do this regularly and you have to do it, like you have to make it meaningful. If you as the leader are rolling your eyes every time we do this, then people aren't going to take it seriously. But when they start to see the magic of it, they get bought in much more quickly. The second piece around building engaging teams is really about understanding communication styles and stress behaviors. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this, but understanding each other's communication styles tells us why we do the crazy things that we do. Right? My sister and I, born and raised in the exact same house, we're only 3 years apart. So we spent most of our life in the same house at the same time. And yet our communication styles could not be more different if you tried. And interestingly enough, I find that, like she is somebody who she has 2 children who are completely different from one another, but yet she looks at me and is like, I don't understand why we don't see the world the same way. And I'm like, yeah, I wonder how that works. So, but understanding why you're going to approach things differently is a big piece of this. One way to do that is to understand people's DISC styles and really unpacking, right? How do people like to take in the world? And then also, right, how do they tend to lead from a place of accepting versus questioning? And in DISC, there are 4 different styles, all have strengths, all have challenges. But when you take a team through this, it starts to help people see, oh, now I see why you always ask me 100 questions. It's not because you're disagreeing with me. You just have 100 questions for everything because your brain works differently than mine. And so using these kinds of tools along the way can be super helpful. When we use DISC, we understand style preferences. We get to know people's strengths, their motivators, and their stressors, which is super important. It allows us then, both as leaders and as other team members, to adapt to one another. We're in the middle of a huge project systems transition for us right now, right? And I have a team member who is some stress behavior has been showing this last week. And somebody who historically would have been like, what's wrong with her, called and said, hey, I'm wondering if maybe we can delay this deadline I'm working on because I know I need this person. And yet they're really stressed right now. And I don't feel like I'm setting her up for success. Like mine can wait if you're all right with that, right? We lead with grace and we lead with an assumption of good intent. The last piece when we understand people's DISC styles is we really do start to leverage people's superpowers. We start to lead from a place of what are they great at and how can we set them up to do more of that. We're all going to have things we're not great at. We don't have to be, but if we build trust, now I'll go to my team member and be like, you know what, this article I'm supposed to write for this month's newsletter, not the thing I love doing. Can you help me out? And now we get better outcomes across the board. So DISC is one way to do this. Birkman is another one. And I hadn't used Birkman as much until recently. But one of the things I like about Birkman is it really talks about it, same concepts as DISC in terms of your style, but it talks about the fact that we all have our usual behavior. Sort of if you get us on our best day, how do we tend to act? But it also talks about what is our stress behavior. And for me, my stress behavior is simply my usual behavior on steroids, which is problematic, but it's easy to guess. But for other people, their stress behavior looks dramatically different than their usual behavior. So if their needs are not met, you start to see their stress behavior and you're like, what is going on? And the more we unpack, we realize, oh, that's because there's stress behavior going on. I'll use an example. I had a team, 2 employees at a client a couple of years ago that were absolutely, I mean, they were literally almost coming to blows. They blew up in a meeting. They were screaming at each other. It was bad. And I wanted, as part of working with them through the kind of mediation process, I first had both of them take DISC. And I was pretty sure, based on the way everybody described how things were going, I was like, oh, these are just 2 opposite DISC styles that aren't coming together. We'll build a little trust. We'll talk about DISC and off we'll go. And one of the behaviors one of the employees' DISC came back and I was like, I think he had somebody else take this. This doesn't sound at all like what people have been describing. And so I got him on the phone and I said, so tell me what you saw in your, I had given him his profile. I explained DISC. And I said, so tell me your thoughts as you looked at your DISC. He's like, oh, this is completely me. This is 100% me. And I said, oh, that's interesting because that's like, that doesn't really match some of what I'm hearing as descriptions. And he goes, oh, that's not me here because I'm super stressed about blah, blah, blah. And I hate this and I hate that and this. And I was like, oh, what we're seeing is a stress behavior, not as usual behavior. But it's so important for people to have this understanding. Like I said, Berkman is not used nearly as frequently. But the part I really liked about it was this idea of there being stress behaviors. And so it's just something to even if it's just a conversation to get people to talk about, what does it actually look like when people melt down? And then the last one that I wanted to share, most of us know, is Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is another great way to get to know people's styles. I often get the question from people of like, should I do Myers-Briggs or should I do DISC? Which one do you like? I love them both. I could nerd out for hours on either or. The reality is I find that for most teams, DISC is an easier starting point. It's so simple. It's 4 styles. People get it really quickly, and therefore they can start to recognize, here's what I need to do to adapt, right? Myers-Briggs, if somebody really wants to get deep into like the emotional intelligence journey and really understand styles, then layer Myers-Briggs on top of it and kind of help them see even a bigger picture. But there's 16 styles in Myers-Briggs. There's 4 letters. People can never remember them. It gets really complicated for some folks. So if you're looking for the quick hit, easy version, I always suggest DISC. And you can do it. You can do a great DISC workshop in, depending on size of your team, 3.5, 4 hours tops. And there's mini versions of it you can do as well. But all of these, the goal is we start to understand how somebody else interacts with the world. And now the crazy things we do don't seem quite so crazy. And we start to build that emotional intelligence muscle. The third pillar that I wanted to talk through today is around establishing expectations and group norms. We often, when people join teams, we just, especially if your team has been together for a long time, like everybody's just going like, all right, this is just how we do things and it's the norm. And then somebody new joins and they're like, well, your norm is weird. So what's going on? And we think new people just already automatically assume those things. In addition to it, right, even the people that have been here forever, I have folks that, Kat on my team has been with me for 6 years. She was my very first consultant hire. She lived COVID with me. We literally probably spent 8 to 9 hours a day on Zoom together with clients coming in and out of our Zoom lines, trying to help get them through their like biggest shifts in employee relations. So we felt like we shared a brain. And yet there are things 6 years later that I will say that she's like, oh, is that why you want me to do it that way? And I'm like, oh, I never explained the why. She just did it the way I asked her to. So there's a couple of tools in our toolbox that make a really big difference when we're talking about expectation setting. The first one is a job description. And I know most people go like, oh, isn't that like piece of paper that's in a drawer that has a lot of cobwebs on it? And isn't that just something we do for legal purposes? For many companies, that is all it is. If you're using job descriptions right, that isn't what it is. The job description is really about outlining expectations, but it makes a big difference as to how you write the job description. So I'm going to give some tips on what this needs to look like in order to take this from being that like cobweb filled piece of paper to something that's an engaging conversation. But great job descriptions set clear expectations, serve for an ongoing coaching tool, and ensure that there's alignment so that Nicole and I both agree on what Nicole should be spending her time on, so that Nicole isn't just getting stuck on the things she loves to do, but more on the things that we need to be the highest priorities. And yes, sorry, Nicole, when she joins a meeting, ends up being my example for everything. So, so here's what's different about great job descriptions. A decent job description, meaning at least it exists, is a list of here's the 100 things somebody's supposed to do. Or even maybe we got it down to 10, right? Here's the 10 things you're responsible for. The problem is there's no way for me to differentiate amongst those 10 things. How often should I be doing them? And there's a really big difference between a role that is spending 60% of their time on client relations work versus spending 60% of my time leading team members. So in this case, what we do when we write job descriptions is, opposed to the list of all of the things, we actually come up with the top 3 to 5 areas of priority. I call them buckets because my brain works in buckets, right? But the top 3 to 5 buckets of responsibilities that every role has. And under each of those buckets, I'm going to put more bullet points that detail out like what that actually means. But when I want somebody to see their job description, I want them to see 3 to 5 buckets that says, this is what this job is all about. And then I want them to see the percentages of time we estimate them to expect. Now, this doesn't mean we're walking around going, okay, Nicole, did you get in 60% this week? It's really intended to be about overtime and, more important, signals priorities. It's not about counting hours. But there is a big difference from everything from who I hire to how I coach you to how you decide to spend your time, where if this is a team lead role, for example, but 60% of that team lead's job is supposed to be on the phone with customers and 20% is supposed to be on leading and coaching other team members. That's very different than a team lead job where those two numbers are flip-flopped, right? And the person that's going to like that job and the person that's going to be good at those jobs is two very different human beings. And so when we write job descriptions this way, we're making sure there is alignment so that we don't come back at the end of the year and go, hey, you know what? I noticed you're never on the phone. You're always coaching people. And Nicole thinks she's been the superstar employee and she's upset. And so this kind of alignment from job descriptions really starts to become the foundation to keep people from feeling like they're just like grasping through the dark, trying to find their way. The number one thing that will impact whether or not your team members are engaged is whether or not they know what it is they're shooting for. If I don't ever know if I'm going to cross the finish line, I'm not going to spend much time trying to get you there. And so we have to give people that kind of role clarity. The second piece to the job descriptions is the goals piece of it. And I know a lot of you, right, if you've been in HR for forever, you're like, oh, of course, like SMART goals. That's easy. That's obvious. They're harder than we think, aren't they? Right? And we get really lax about them. A couple of years ago, I was teaching a class on goal setting for a client, and I introduced SMART goals. And I was really worried that SMART goals was like, it feels to those of us who've been doing HR forever, right? It feels really basic. And so I introduced the concept, and their VP, like the head of the entire company, kind of raises his hand and he's like, Katie, I have a question. And I thought, oh, he's about to like tell me that this is way too entry level. He's like, this is great. SMART goals are a great idea. Did you invent them? And I'm like, oh, wouldn't I be a millionaire? So these are not new to us, but yet think about how many of your team members actually have SMART goals. How many times do we actually get down to this level? And employees, we expect the employee to just magically know these kinds of things. So we have to spend time getting really clear on this and making sure that they're written down and that you refer back to them on a regular basis. And it is easier said than done, right? I teach this all of the time, and yet I'll be the first one to be like, some of my team members have them, some not so much. We need to refresh others because their job descriptions have shifted, right? So making sure you're really spending time on all of this is really critical. The other tool that I find really helpful once you've set the goals is, first of all, I am a firm believer in get rid of your old performance reviews. Get rid of them. If you could even take out the words meets and exceeds expectations, I would be the first to tell you it's the best thing you will have ever done. Get rid of the old version of performance reviews and start implementing coaching conversations. And this discussion will be game changing in terms of how people start to think about their development and their goals. So even talking to people in their coaching conversations around, okay, or a new hire, right? It's 6 months from now and we're having this conversation. You're right on track. I'm super happy with where you're at. You're feeling great. What does that look like? What have you done? Nicole and I had this conversation when she started February of 2024. We had this discussion and I said, okay, in 6 months, what is it that you're taking on independently that's going to make you feel like I really know what I'm doing? And at the 6-month mark, we did a check-in and I said, okay, how far along do you feel like you are on that? And what more onboarding do we need? And what training, like what was harder than you thought it would be when you started 6 months ago? And then have the employees talk about, okay, that's to like be meeting expectations, right? But what if I blew it out of the water? What would that look like? And it's this second piece that often people don't know from their leader. They might know what it looks like to be good every day, but they don't know what it would take to excel. And whether you do a performance evaluation or you just have coaching conversations, people want to know what it looks like to excel, because to be honest, right, my bar might be really high. And so if my bar is high and I think excelling, like I think I'm hitting it, and you think I'm here, like that's a problem. And so again, you get better engagement from people when they're not guessing where they fall. The next piece is really around engagement, is around like group norms come from core values. If people don't know the core values of the organization or the team, you're not going to make much progress. Now, this doesn't have to be the corporate version of core values, right? But I will tell you, like getting people to speak out loud, especially like we have a team that has really strong group norms. And it was super interesting to get them to share what they saw as like, here's what I think matters to all of us. They didn't need me to write the core values. That would have been crazy. But them doing it as a group was wildly impactful, because some of the people who weren't necessarily living up to some of those core values were like, oh, that's not just a Katie thing. The whole team cares about that. Maybe I need to step that up, right? And so it really started to make a huge difference. This other concept, and Lencioni talks about this a bit in his book, but we introduced this concept of there's a difference between being a gymnastics team and being a basketball team. Gymnastics teams, right? One team member can win the gold medal and everybody else could not, and that team member is still successful. But in basketball, one person cannot win the gold medal. Everybody on the team has to win it together. And so how you operate is very different. I'll use the example at our company, right? Recruiters are notorious gymnasts. They handle their own work from beginning to end. Nobody else has to get involved. And they are praised by the more they can take on all by themselves. That's what gets them recognized and promoted in recruiting world. The problem is the minute you get them support to help them out, they push those people away and they get really annoyed. And more importantly, they compete with one another, just like gymnasts are known for doing, because, right, if I'm great, well, somebody else can't also be great because there's not enough space in a gymnastics team many times. Whereas in basketball, we all have to play together. We have to be able to anticipate the pass. We need to know the bigger playbook, and we need to be able to communicate regularly. And most importantly, we got to remember that in order for us to win, we all have to win together. So having even just the conversation about what are the two different types of teams, which type of team do you want to be and need to be, and what would make you a better basketball team going forward. So I've facilitated with a ton of clients, just even getting the team to understand like what would be better if they played more basketball. And it's really interesting. I've seen some teams stare at me like, well, nothing, like we're fine, nothing's broken. And they're teams that get along and they're like, we don't need to do anything different. But then they start to realize that just like the people row in the crew boat, right? It would be easier in a couple of cases if we were playing more basketball. And then much like the trust exercise earlier around acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, facilitating with your team along with the core values concept, facilitating this conversation with your team around what are, on a day-to-day basis, what are your group norms? What is acceptable and unacceptable in order to deliver on those core values? And again, this should never be the leader telling people what these are. This should very much be a collaborative conversation with the team coming up with the ideas along the way. So then comes a big question, right? Everything I've talked about so far has been about get the team to do it, get the team to do it. And then you go, but my team just stares at me in meetings and nobody gives me any good feedback. So one of the things that I think it's really important to remember when you're getting crickets in a meeting the issue may not actually be the participants, which is what I often hear from leaders and business owners of like, well, I just don't have a very good team. They all just stare at me. Well, what if it's not the team? And instead, what if it's about your facilitation techniques? It may not be about you as a facilitator, but there's techniques out there that you have to use. And also, it's likely about a lack of trust in general. If trust on your team is low, people aren't going to engage in a meeting because they might sound stupid or somebody might think poorly of them. And so you've got to get trust up in order to get people to engage more. A couple of ideas. First of all, particularly if you're finding your team won't engage, use small breakouts. So in my world, even though we're all remote, I use Zoom breakout rooms so that there's only 2 or 3 people in a room at a time. In person, right? Have them break out into 2s and 3s to do exercises, even the conversations we've represented here, and then bring the small groups back to the big group. From a DISC perspective, a Myers-Briggs perspective, there's a whole group of styles that don't like large group conversations. So if you throw out a brainstorm question and you didn't give me any preparation and it's in front of a large group of people, it doesn't matter how much I trust you, I'm not likely to engage. So you need to break people into smaller groups so that they'll buy in, and then the ideas can be the team's idea. They don't have to be their personal idea. Along those lines, I also use Post-it notes, bad for the environment, but great for interaction. I'll give people a stack of Post-it notes and say, write one idea per Post-it note and put them all up on the wall, and then we can sort them through. But that way people can share their ideas without having to like be the loudest voice or shoot their hand up. Or again, if trust is low, it gives them a way to kind of share their ideas without worrying about being like chastised or made fun of. Seriously, we do workshops, like my team goes through and Post-it notes like they're going out of style when we're in our team meeting, but it's a great way to get people to engage. I've even had some clients that create a Post-it note wall if they're in person. And at any given time, right, part of that wall is the new idea of the week. And as you think of like, we should do, right, just put it on the Post-it note and then it's already there for us to talk about at the next team meeting. Other ideas. If you are the leader in general, right? If you're the manager or the owner, don't be the leader of the discussion. It is really hard when you like, no matter what, if you are the manager or the owner, your employees always see you in that realm, right? So if you're trying to just facilitate, they're going to assume you're steering the conversation or you didn't like an idea, right? And so to the extent that you can have others lead the discussions and get yourself out of the focal point, you will likely get more engagement. Then when you're not the facilitator, listen, don't talk. Just let people come together. When we did the exercise with my team that came with these 3 great ideas came out of, it killed me because it's one of my favorite exercises. So I wanted to be in with the teams, but I was like, no. So I went over and I did the exercise all by myself, which killed me because I'm an extrovert. So it was so painful, but I did the exercise all by myself. And I didn't even go over and listen in. Like once in a while I peeked in because I just couldn't help it. But I just gave them a chance to talk and not feel like they had to ask me if it was okay. I stood there and I heard a lot, right? I knew the ideas that were coming out, but I wasn't participating, so I didn't squash the engagement. And then most importantly, ask really engaging questions. A couple of examples. This is one of the ones that I use that I love, right? If I went to the team and said, like, what do we need to do to meet a revenue goal? Everybody'd be like, I don't know, like do more advertising, right? So instead we reframed it. And the exercise was the government has come out and announced a whole new program. And if your business means X dollars in revenue, right? Up it from where you are today, every employee on the team gets $1 million, but we have to get there by the end of December. If that was the goal, what recommendations would the employees put in place? What would they do? This, I got to tell you, was one of the most game-changing exercises. 3 big ideas came out of this, all of which people took ownership. It was a really cool way to get them. And they were like, well, do we still get $1 million? And I was like, well, hey, if it really all worked, I might give you $1 million, right? But the engagement, it wasn't about like, let's make more money for the owner, right? Like it just flipped their mindset a little bit. And so they were more creative. They thought outside of the box. They didn't just think about like, well, Katie just wants us to do a little bit more, right? I made it a big stretch, so they really had to think about things differently. We also do a SWOT analysis, which is a great way to get a team engaged, asking people, right, in our organization, what do you see as our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats? SWOT analysis is an age-old business term, and it works really well. I know nothing makes my heart happier than a great day of a SWOT analysis. My team, because I do have a couple on my team that don't like the term SWOT because it says weaknesses. So my folks that don't like conflict hated my SWOT analysis days. And so they came up with a new version. They refer to it as soar like an eagle. And it's strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and realities. And so you can make it whatever you want, but getting the team to think about like what's getting in their way every day, what could make their life easier, what could make it better if, is a great way. And again, if you use the small groups, now you've got people actively engaged. If you just say, so what's working? They're not likely to tell you that kind of information, but make it a bigger exercise and they start to get really excited. The last one that I want to talk about is the tool. We have red, yellow, green cards that, not everybody wants to say, Katie, I don't like that idea, right? Or like, it's hard to read a room sometimes if you do have to have a larger group. So the way we do it is as we're having a conversation, if we're brainstorming an idea, I'll say like, all right, guys, give me a sense like how you feeling about this. And if somebody's on board, they hold up their green card. If somebody's on the fence, they hold up the yellow. And if they're like, I hate this idea, they hold up their red. That really helps me when I've got team members who are, if they disagree, they don't like to say they disagree. This gives them a visual way to just be like, they raise it really slowly sometimes, but I can at least see the red one moving enough to realize, hold on a minute, we need to slow our roll. Which is really important because I'm the only person of my disc style on my team, and my disc style runs fast. So we've got to slow my roll often. Most importantly, when we start thinking about facilitation techniques and really everything from a team perspective, if we don't change our approach, then we're never going to get different results. And I think we all inherently know that. And yet when it comes to team building, kind of forget that this is something that actually takes a regular and consistent development and investment of your time. And you've got to spend some time being really strategic about how to approach it. I'm going to stop there and open this up for questions for folks. Before I do, I always want to let folks know anyone that attends one of our webinars automatically is eligible for a free HR strategy session. That's an hour with me to talk about whether it be like specifically you're like, Katie, I'm struggling with this particular idea you had and give us, I need some more information. Or if more broadly you are, you're trying to think about like, what does the right strategy look like for you on an HR level? We'll be happy to spend some time, give you some recommendations from beginning to end. So feel free. All you need to do is email us after this at HR@People Solutions Center, and Nicole will reach out and get that scheduled for you so that we can spend time together. And then also, if you have not already, make sure that you get on our list for our quarterly newsletters so that you are getting those regularly and getting all of the great tips that my team puts together for us. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions I can answer for folks? Anything you were hoping to get out of today that I didn't touch on? I always give people a minute in case they're looking for the mute button. I think we're great. We will send out the video recording. So if you want to go back and see this, Nicole will also include a link to the slides so that you can look at those for references along the way. But we so appreciate you taking your time out today to join us. We'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you if there's anything we can help you with. But otherwise, have a fabulous Thursday.
Thank you. This training was fabulous. You got me excited, but I had to go into my next meeting. So I'm looking forward.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
Okay.
All right.